Tammy Hill, one of my favorite mentors, was a guest on my podcast earlier this year, and she talks about using touch as a powerful language for connection, love, and meaning in marriage. Can you talk more on why that type of touch is a powerful language when even words aren't sufficient?
Yeah. Well, you're asking me to say something that words aren't sufficient for.
I know, right?
But
Uh-huh.
I think it's like we talked about Arrow's energy being expansive and creative. It feels expansive. In those times when it's almost like I'm praying over my husband while I'm touching him, or he's praying over me while he's touching me. And it becomes somewhat of an ethereal type of an experience where you're connecting together in this really intimate way. And it feels like we're connecting with heaven at the same time. And there's a conduit that just pours out goodness and forgiveness and generosity towards one another, an increased loyalty that we feel for one another. It just does so much to strengthen our relationship when we take time to do this type of making love, this orgasmic meditations with the spiritual dimension included in it. To me, is replenishing, and that's what the name of my book is, Replenish. I think it is what restores the energy to our lives so that we have the energy we need to take care of all the responsibilities you have when you have a family. And I know that I'm so grateful for learning this from Diana Richardson and then doing through my own work and being really prayerful in what I'm learning and what I'm teaching is that add the spiritual kind of conduit information to it. And it feels like we're living more true to our capabilities. We're being more true to ourselves and we're fortifying our relationship in a really deep but passionate way. I think it's what Replenish is all about.
I love that. That is so good. That's so good. Dr. Julie Slattery talks about the importance of making time for great sexual connection.
I think invest in your sex life. So
Great.
for a lot of people, the biggest investment we can make is time.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you can have all the best aspirations, but you get so busy. And again, this feels like it shouldn't be a priority.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't date anymore. You don't get away, just the two of you. And this is something that I have to be continually reminded of, even as I'm in this work. I tend to be really work oriented and serious. And so my husband's the fun one.
Uh-huh.
And even yesterday, he's like, when's our next vacation?
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, next vacation? We just had one in November. Why are we thinking of another one? And even the one in November, it was like he had to badger me. I'm like, well, we went on vacation with the kids. He's like, no, that doesn't count. We need to get away, just the two of us. And I need to be reminded of that. I need to be like, we work together now. So I'm like, I'm with you all the time. But when do we have time regularly during the week, regularly during the year where we're just focusing on our intimacy?
And to play, right? It's
Yes.
to play.
Yeah. Yeah. And to forget about all the worries because they're still going to be there when we get home from vacation or we get back from that date. But, the research shows that playing together and experiencing new things together and laughing together, those all also increase faithfulness and bonding and the feeling of friendship. And so it's a simple thing, but it makes a world of difference. Like if you talk to couples that are really satisfied in their intimacy, ask them how they prioritize time together. And you'll probably find that that's a really important piece, regardless of what season of life they might be in.
That is so, so good. I love that. Time. It really is that.
Yep.
Because which might mean you need to take an honest look at your lifestyle and make some adjustments. Because you might be filling it with a lot of distractions that are keeping you away from building true and authentic intimacy.
Yeah. Yep.
My guests, Glenn and Phyllis Hill, talk about the ability to communicate about your experience with sex in a non-judgmental, non-threatening way, And I love this tip because if more couples can communicate about sex as candidly as them, then I think you'd see a lot more ease in being able to relate better sexually in and out of the bedroom.
I would say the biggest thing is that we have learned to be able to communicate by saying, I feel sexual joy.
Mm.
I am experiencing sexual joy. It tunes Glenn in. He's like, ooh, what's happening with sexual joy? And I'm like, well, I was just thinking it'd be really fun tonight to play sexually. And then we just open up the communication. He does that with me. I do that with him. We say things like, oh, I'm feeling sexually lonely. And that's no accusation. It's just an experience. I'm experiencing
Yeah.
sexual loneliness. And Glenn will be like, oh, babe, what's happening with that? And I'm like, well, I feel like we've just done too many quickies lately. And I have more fun when it's longer and there's real time for
Yeah.
play and pleasure.
Yeah.
And then he just hears me. I'm not pointing a finger. I'm not yelling at him. I'm not giving him the cold shoulder. It's a powerful way to communicate sexual joy and sexual loneliness. And that openness, I think, has drawn us together, where in the past it would be more of, well, we haven't done it lately because you've been too busy. And that just sounds like such an accusation instead of saying, man, I'm just feeling sexually lonely. And to be able to go, oh, what's happening with that? And showing
Yeah.
up in that space is so huge.
Yeah, we now realize, again, just scientifically, dynamic sexual connection is built on top of deep emotional connection, which again is how we're coded from birth. We're hardwired that way. Every 12-month-old on the planet conveys authentically at the core, vulnerably all the time. Well, there's no birthday where that's supposed to change. We don't say happy birthday, Dan, you're 8. Now shut up. We don't want to hear from you anymore emotionally. That doesn't make any sense. But we do that culturally, where Dan got all these messages, especially as a man in this culture, that, well, men don't cry. They're just self-contained. They're an island. They're a rock. And so then Dan and Glenn and women get the message as well, to stop experiencing what you're experiencing and to shut up about it.
That's really good.
And I think just sexually, for me, sexually, to be able to even know that I am safe to say, well, I felt really pain,
Yeah.
or I felt really hurt last night when you spiraled and it kind of affected our whole sex date.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that he can make space for that. He can hear it. He can say, yeah, wow, I feel some guilt about that.
Yeah.
But we're not in conflict, and it doesn't ruin us for days. It's actually draws us closer together. And that is, to me, the incredible God piece in it that doesn't even make sense, that we can share the pain that we're experiencing with each other and it brings us closer together.
Mm.
And I know that's not how we functioned early on in marriage.
Yeah.
Everything was a fight. And I'm right or you're right. One of us has to be right. Instead of just going, no, I'm just experiencing pain in this. And it's just so powerful. I think that's why last night even I was able to show up, even though he was spiraling and kind of the woe is me. And it really almost looked like, Phyllis, this is all your fault in his verbiage. But I know it's not. And I know he's spiraling. And it gave me the power to show up for him and to be just able to emotionally give to the situation and pull him out. And so we still had a great, fun sexual encounter, because it's like, I can show up for you in that space because I know we're emotionally connected. And so that's the power of this kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
being able to do that, showing up for each other emotionally, just brings your sexual connection to another level.
That's really good. Dr. Lori Watson shares her black belt sex tip that's especially helpful for women to have more pleasure during sex.
Well, I certainly think using a vibrator, sometimes during sexual intercourse, can feel really great for couples. It kind of ensures for orgasm. And I think men who are having trouble with erections or premature ejaculation are very anxious that they will fail, they will not perform, she will not climax, and then he's a total failure. So a vibrator is kind of a saving grace. It's certainly great for Thursday sex. And, it might be great for Saturday night sex too. But there's nothing wrong with that to kind of add, a sense of physiological speeding up of her slower arousal cycle so that they kind of match a little bit better. Go for it. Maybe that feels weird to you or you shouldn't need that. But, it can be fun. It can kind of take some of the pressure off the penis. It can also, be enjoyable. And certainly you want to teach your partner how to touch you if you're a woman. Um,
So sometimes this sort of shortens that arousal period and gets you kind of to the pleasure part of touching faster.
My guests, Alex and Katie Dutton from Every Love Intimates, talks about scheduling sex, how to do it, and how it works in their marriage.
I would say one thing that we have found, especially after we have one son and a little girl on the way, is scheduling time to be intimate. I think that
Uh-huh.
helped me a lot as the husband with the higher drive, just to know that it's coming. And yeah, I would say scheduling or at least having a plan as to how you're gonna initiate or when you can initiate, just with how busy life
Yeah.
is right now. And I feel like so many people are in that same boat. So I would say scheduling would be mine.
Yeah. And then I would probably say check in and find something new that the person is thinking of. Because, especially like you said, they've been married a long time, they've got their routine down, it's going really well. It can always get better. So, on top of, yeah, I feel like scheduling huge. That changed everything for us because I kind of needed to prepare and enjoy like the day of foreplay to feel really great about the night. And so that's been good for us. But then also once you're in that routine, it can get repetitive. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means it's repetitive. So if you can check in, what he wanted 3 years ago might be different than what he wants right now,
Uh-huh.
and what he thinks of tomorrow, right? So finding new things to try or finding things that are on their mind that we may not have done or we did 2 years ago that we totally forgot about. Just talking about it and checking in what's still working, what's not working anymore. That I feel like is a huge game changer. Once we started openly talking about
Wow.
what we liked. Oh, and
Yeah.
during
Yes.
that like really does it for him. If
Yeah.
you're in the middle of it and you share what you like and what's going well, I feel like
It's a huge turn on.
yeah, that's a huge turn on. It's a confidence booster. It gets everything going even more. So that would be mine
Well,
probably.
yeah, you could have a time like I thought I was doing great, thought everything was going great. And then afterwards, we kind of just sharing about the checking in thing, that kind of became almost every time we were intimate. That was like words we would talk about, like, hey, how did you like this? Like, what about this did you not like? When that started happening, that was huge. So when I was able to tell Kenny, like, hey, during, if you would let me know, like, oh, I don't like that, or hey, I really like that. That was for me a huge thing. Just I
Well, and then
think,
obviously trickled over to me as well.
yes, yes. Just thanks
Improved
for
both
both
of
of
us.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah, but checking in, I would say that's the top of the list.
That's good. You're both very collaborative in that. Mark Goldberg has a tip, especially for couples in long-term relationships such as marriage, on how to keep things fresh and exciting over the long haul.
What I would say is, and again, this definitely speaks to people who are in long-term relationships, is don't get too complacent. If things are working really well in the beginning, that's great. And I wish you like years and years of happiness and bliss. What I also know is that many couples do not communicate about what's working and only start to have conversations once something like goes off the tracks for them, which is inevitable, I believe. It's going to happen for
Right.
everybody.
Uh-huh.
But then they're doing a lot of like retro work, trying to figure out what happened, why did things go off track. I don't know if you work with any couples directly, or to what degree, but I cannot tell you how many couples I've encountered that are married for decades. And I'm the first person who ever asked them, even between themselves, like, well, how did you come to develop that script? What happened? They're like, we never spoke about it. We've been having sex for 30 plus years.
Uh-huh.
And we know this is not like that communication piece, I think, is really, really big. And I think that's a big part of where couples intimacy comes from, is like sharing like these vulnerable elements, whether they are individually driven, whether they're couple driven, really being able to communicate about like sexual wants, needs, preferences, fears, worries, concerns, I believe is something that will go with couples over the lifespan. And I think that'll be the most protective element that a couple can have when inevitably life is going to throw curveballs. The human body is going to throw curveballs. The relationship is going to throw curveballs. You're prepared and ready to talk about that and collaborate around that as a team.
That's so good. Sierra Beltran shares her black belt sex tip, and it's all about stepping outside of your comfort zone.
For me, it really is like experimenting, like stepping out of your comfort zone. That was so hard for me. And like, not my husband, like that's not hard for him. He's like, let's just do, whatever.
Okay.
It was really hard for me. I was hesitant, but like, I mean, things like toys, things like role playing, things like just that are definitely not easy to like just do for some people like me. Don't be scared. Like, don't be scared to like explore with your partner, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you might still be scared, but it's have courage, right?
Yeah, that
I've
would
heard, like,
definitely
I
be a
love
good
this.
piece of
Yeah.
advice.
The difference between courage and confidence is that confidence feels good.
True.
It's the same action. It's just
Yes.
you don't feel good in the moment, but that's
Yes.
real courage, right? But afterwards,
Yes.
you're like, hey, that actually wasn't that bad. I kind
Oh
of
my
like that.
gosh. I'm telling you, like experimenting and exploring will totally like transform your marriage sex wise.
That is so good.
It really will.
Great. Ariel Finlanson's next tip is especially applicable to busy moms.
As a mother, I was kind of trained that I serve my kids and I serve my husband, and that showed up in our sex life as well. Instead of allowing myself to be present in myself and let him focus on me, I felt the need to care for him. And if you know anything about women's sexuality, that doesn't really work because
Nope.
you
It's
have
not
to be
erotic.
present in yourself, because it's usually harder for women to be aroused and reach orgasm than it is for men. And so you have to start practicing this ability to let someone focus on you. And that also helped, like growing up, I heard a lot about servicing your husband, right? This idea of like sex is a need for them. And as their wife, I service them, and shifting it to see it as a way for my husband to serve me. I'm more willing to and wanting to participate, because it's like not another thing on my to-do list. It's a space where I've been caring for people all day, and now my husband can come and care for me and show me love. And I think if you start practicing this when you're out and about, right, with family or friends, like, hey, could you hold my baby so I can eat without having to hold the baby? Will you help me with this? I think that gives us a great chance then to start talking about that and practicing that in the bedroom as well.
Tammy Hill shares a black belt sex tip that's all about focusing on the goodness and the greatness of all of the beautiful things that marriage can offer.
I always talk about, like, if I had a great big white piece of paper right here, and I took a pencil and put a little dot on this blank piece of paper, our eyes are going to focus on the dot, right? That's the one mar that we see on the paper.
Right.
And so to me, I have to kind of
Our brains are hardwired for that.
Right. And so instead of focusing on that dot, to think of all of the good, the white, all of the things that are happening that are good and that are evidence that your life together is really quite sweet. And so I think reframing differences, appreciating the differences, but not getting stuck in them, and trying to focus more on what is it that we together bless. How do we bless one another together?
I like that. That's very good. Very good. My guest, Danielle Savory, talked about how being cherished can be its own version of getting turned on in this black belt sex tip.
When I allow myself to get to a place of cherish, it naturally brings on a turn on that might be different than just like explicitly like erotic turn on or thinking of fantasy or doing these other things. Like it really creates this very rich experience of slowing down and having this novelty, even though it's like somebody that's so familiar, you're also looking at them through the lens of impermanence and like, I don't know how long, and what if this really was the last day, and like how that would look and how that would feel, and like getting into it and like soaking in every moment. So then when it comes to that perspective of cherishing your spouse, especially around sexuality, it's like really paying attention from this place of like awe and like enjoyment and surrender and trust. And I just think that some of my best sexual experiences has come from these like absolute cherishing moments of like, this is what we have, this is what we have right now. And, you know, beyond that, I just think that it has an impact where it stays with you longer, and you realize like how important it is to like prioritize this, because you really don't know. So it's like, I want to cherish the moments that we have. Like, we have this week. Like, when are we going to be connecting? You know, like, so that no matter what, like, I know that I'm going to look back and be like, even if there was an argument right before we left, like, there was still moments where we were so connected and intimate and cherishing each other on the regular. It puts a sense of, I don't want to say urgency in those connections, but for sure a sense of importance, a sense of priority when you're measuring up everything else, and when it's so easy to be like, does sex really matter? Does pleasure really matter? Do these things really matter? It really can put in this sense of like, no, this really matters because it's impermanent.
Dr. Jennifer Finen, another one of my favorite mentors, has a great black belt sex tip about how to run your marriage from the best in you, not from the worst in you.
First of all, I think we have to kind of see that we're inclined to this justification mindset. You know, you were such a jerk when you said that, or that was so dumb or unfair, therefore I can be dumb and unfair back. I think we have to wake up to that, because again, it's a death spiral. It's going to take the marriage down when we're running it by the worst in ourselves. So if we can understand that impulse and see it in ourselves, then we are in a position to ask ourselves, who am I going to be? Right? What kind of person am I going to be in this marriage? Am I going to love? Because true love is an act of agency. It's not just in reaction to being loved. And so we have to reference our own integrity, our own higher self. We have to earn our own self-respect more even than the respect of a partner. That is, I have to be the kind of person that I know is respect worthy, that I can feel good about my behavior if you want a chance of a good marriage and a chance of being happy in your marriage. Because if you live into your lesser self, even if your spouse lives into their better self, you won't be happy, because you know that you're not really someone that you respect. And that's a big deal.
I can see how if I were to live into my better self, especially in those moments when it's so easy to justify victimhood or whatever, if I can really live into my better self, it actually makes me a easier person to love. Like,
Oh,
for my,
definitely.
yeah, I
Oh,
become a better
100%.
choice in that moment
Yeah.
too. At
Yeah.
least
So,
not in that moment, but maybe the next moment or the next
yeah.
time. It
Yeah.
sets me up for more success down the road.
Absolutely. And I think when we're really truly coming from a stronger place inside, a spouse, a child, a friend can map that pretty quickly. Like, they can feel that it's not reactive, that it's not manipulative, that it's not justified. And it pulls for the better in them too. Your spouse, they always have their agency. But usually what we do in our relationships is we kind of just move into a reactive system. And so we're just reacting at the level that the system asks of us in a way, even though we're co-creating that reality. So when you bring your stronger self, you're actually inviting your spouse to bring more integrity, more courage, more love to that engagement as well.
That is so good. This next tip from Kathleen Smith talks about how being a good lover, being even good at sex, includes being really responsible for yourself. And this next tip illustrates how to do that beautifully. You say this line over and over in your book that I love. It's about not being responsible for your spouse, it's being responsible to your spouse. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more in this context?
Yeah, being responsible to somebody is thinking about how you want to show up and be present and be sort of a thoughtful, responsible human in relationship to them. Because we're really, when you think about how do I want to be responsible to my spouse, that could look like, this is how I share my thinking or my needs. This is how I listen to them and be thoughtful and respectful. Maybe being responsible to them is when they're anxious, I sit there and listen instead of fixing the problem for them, right? That's a different way of functioning where you're connected to them, but you're not treating them like, they're a part of you, that they're a separate person in some ways. And often the ways that we try and be responsible for people isn't really that's helpful. It's that what in Bowen theory is called, as I said before, being irresponsibly over-involved. It's not really a type of responsibility at all.
This last tip today comes from Bonnie Young. We had a great episode about sharing power in a marriage, and it's not what you think it is. Anyway, this is her black belt sex tip on how to make sex great because you're as equal partners in bed. You're sharing the power in bed.
Yeah, when power is not equally shared, I think it can just really pervert even the most, genuine, heartfelt desires to feel connected or healthy expressions of sexuality. So I think we have to be really purposeful. Like, am I using sex to try to control my spouse's behavior? Whether that's in a way where I'm trying to get something from him or I'm trying to keep him at bay or her at, in my opinion, what it should be, which is a celebration of the beautiful connection and love that we have together and a place to celebrate our relationship rather than to try to control or manipulate the partner.
All right, there you have it. We've covered so many wonderful black belt sex tips in this episode. I'm so grateful you listened. I hope there is something in here that you can take action on immediately in your marriage. Remember, it's by putting things into action is where you really start to see changes in your relationship. If you would like help with action in your relationship, I have a fantastic program. It's called the Get Your Marriage On program. It's for couples and individuals that want to really move the needle in a positive direction in their relationship. You can get all those details on getyourmarriageon.com. It includes coaching, it includes a community, and it includes an in-depth course, really designed to help you build a stronger marriage. I see you next week, and have a happy new year.